Hello, this is Patricia Martin, host of Jung in the World, where we explore bold topics and new terrain in psychology and Jungian theory. Before this interview with Bill Hayes begins, I wanted to come on and address the controversy surrounding a recent article in The New Yorker by Rachel Lviv that revealed evidence that Bill Hayes' partner, the renowned neurologist Oliver Sacks, had embellished patient case studies. And the article documents that Sacks admitted in private journals to have written pure fabrications and given patients, quote, powers of speech they didn't possess, unquote. Aviv argues that Sacks projected his own repressed life onto his patients, specifically his homosexuality. The background on that is that Sacks remained celibate for 44 years while he was undergoing psychoanalysis. And his patients, argues Rachel Lviv, became vehicles for exploring the awakenings he couldn't experience himself. That topic and these allegations about Oliver Sacks have roiled through psychoanalytic circles and across many of the social sciences. All the more reason to bring you this important interview with Bill Hayes, who became Oliver Sacks's friend, confidant, and partner. I invite you to listen in for yourself. Hello, this is Patricia Martin, and welcome to Jung in the World. Today, we're talking with Bill Hayes, whose book, Insomniac City, New York, Oliver Sacks, and Me, offers an intimate glimpse into a relationship with his late partner, Oliver Sacks. Hayes is a Guggenheim Fellow, acclaimed author, and a photographer. He's written 7 books. A frequent contributor to the New York Times, his work has also appeared in The Guardian, The Wall Street Journal, and The New Yorker. His photography has been exhibited internationally, and he serves as a co-editor of the posthumous works of Oliver Sacks. Welcome, Bill Hayes. It's great to have you.
It's so great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I have been very interested in the work of Oliver Sacks, and I think part of that is because, first of all, he was a pioneer in neuroscience, and he was a scholar of the highest order, and so he made his work accessible to the public, which is it's just such a rare set of traits that he had. That when I read your book and I read other material you've written about Oliver, I was determined to get you on the show. And so I want to start with this idea of Oliver's personality. And I think it was mentioned in the book that he was almost, or maybe he said this about himself, he was almost monk-like.
Uh-huh.
And so here he is, he's this monk-like man, and yet he has this oeuvre of books and articles. He's traveling internationally, giving speeches. He's on radio, and I just wondered if those two personalities, the monk introvert and the author extrovert, happily coexisted for him, or was that a bit of a challenge?
It was, I think, a tension and a challenge for him. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Oliver was truly shy to the core. Timid is a word he often used. And, looking back, I think there are lots of reasons for that. Part of it is just in his DNA. But he also was gay and came out to his parents at age 18 in the mid-1950s at a time when homosexuality was illegal in England. And, didn't feel like he fit into the conventional world. He was the youngest of 4 brothers. His 2 eldest brothers were a lot older, so he never really got to know them until later in his life. And he was eccentric. And his shyness was part of his eccentricity. But on the other hand, there was a bit of a ham in him. When he did give lectures or talk or teach, he'd be horribly nervous beforehand, like hilariously nervous, eccentrically nervous. And then once he got to the podium and before an audience, he would just open up. And I think he really enjoyed it, and he enjoyed the interaction with readers and with audiences. Um, and it's fun for me, even now, to look on YouTube at some of the interviews he did um, that were videotaped. There's a great one from the World Science Festival. I think it was 2006 when Hallucinations came out. And he was just authentically himself. But once he, got in the chair or was on the podium, he could speak and answer questions. And I think one reason that Oliver became so popular and so beloved, because he really was beloved, was those traits endeared him to people. His stuttering, his nervousness at the start of a talk, when he would admit that he was nervous or terrified, he was often say that, like terrified, and then just speak brilliantly for an hour or reading from one of his books. So he definitely enjoyed that aspect of his life of, you know, being in the public eye, I guess.
So,
But
well, I was going to ask you about this being in the public eye.
Mhm.
You, I read his 2015 memoir, which is very much about him being gay.
Right,
But that was written at the end of his life.
right.
And so had that by then come more easily to him to write about it so openly after, being a famous person in the sciences? Or was that still a challenge for him to kind of open himself up to something so personal?
It was a really long process. We first met in 2008. I was living in San Francisco, and of all things, he wrote me a letter. How old-fashioned and romantic is that? He read one of my early books called The Anatomist, which tells the story behind the 19th century classic Gray's Anatomy. And it had recently been published, and he wrote me a letter via my publisher, just saying, "Dear Mr. Hayes, congratulations on your book. I truly enjoyed it." And he said, "Both of my parents were physicians. My two older brothers were physicians. I grew up with a copy of Gray's Anatomy, and I really enjoyed your book." And then about a year later, I moved to New York, not for Oliver. It was just completely different reason. I wanted to start my life over. I'd lost suddenly and unexpectedly a partner I'd had for 17 years. And I'd always loved New York City. So I just up and moved. And once I moved here, we got in touch and we started spending time together and fell in love quickly. But he was still very closeted at that time. And in the beginning, very uncomfortable, unsure of himself, being with me in public or going to public, you know,
Mm.
uh, events or concerts or that sort of thing. And so that was, a challenge in the early years of our relationship. I never ever pushed him to come out. It was a process of his own,
Mm.
overcoming his own internalized homophobia, as he wrote about in On the Move, his final memoir. And, just being a neurologist and a famous person in the world, it was just not something he felt comfortable talking about. He was often asked in interviews for his various books over the years about his personal life, and he just, wouldn't talk about his personal life. And, a lot of people, funnily enough, assumed he was straight, in part because of the film Awakenings, based on his book, starring Robin Williams. And the film sort of subtly implies that the Oliver Sacks character is having some kind of romance with one of the nurses. So that sort of gave people an idea that, well, maybe he's actually straight. But I'll tell you this, when I met him in person for the first time and we had lunch, and it was just really very collegial at the time, I knew instantly he's gay. And I thought, he is so handsome and he is so brilliant and he is so funny. and neurotic. And he was unlike anyone I had ever met.
Well, it also strikes me that he, in so much of his work, was characterizing himself in reaction to the case studies he was putting forward, meaning it wasn't about him. It was
Right.
it was about who he was trying to heal
Right.
and his reaction to that process. And so I could see very much how that was really how he conducted his professional life,
Yeah.
being really the spokesperson for the work rather than Oliver Sacks, the rock star.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I want to add to my earlier comment about the process of his embracing his sexuality and our relationship coming out, and writing about it in On the Move, his final memoir. He wrote that entire book and submitted it maybe 3 weeks before he got his terminal cancer diagnosis. So his coming out wasn't based upon the fact that he was going to be dying, that he had terminal cancer. He had completed it in around Christmas 2014. And when he decided to write that memoir, from the very beginning, I remember he said, I want to be completely open about my whole life. So you've read the book. Um, Open not only about his struggles with homosexuality and being gay, his internalized homophobia, his unrequited romances, but also about our relationship. But not just about that. He also writes very openly about his drug use as an young man, and the disasters and contradictions of his professional career. So he was ready by then to really be open. And I would say that one milestone event, when I look back on it, took place in June 2014 when he kind of impulsively decided to go to Jerusalem, Israel, for one of his favorite cousins' 100th birthday, his cousin Marjorie. And they had been very close as children. And he knew her birthday was coming up. He called her to say an early happy birthday. And she said, well, you have to come to my party. And he said, I will. And so within about 2 weeks, and he brought me. And we were on a plane to Jerusalem and went to the party and met many of his relatives, some very Orthodox Jewish relatives. And everyone was so welcoming of us as a couple and of me and loving of Oliver. And it was, I think, a milestone event in his life. And probably, he's maybe halfway through writing the memoir. And it just, I think, gave him more reassurance that he could just be open about who he really was.
Well, I think this is a real beautiful example of what Carl Jung would call individuation. That
Mhm.
that with each iteration that the self goes through,
Yeah.
if we can integrate that with what came before, then we're growing.
Yeah.
And so what I derived from Insomniac City was that you had those last 6 years, and it was, it was like a growth spurt, it
Uh-huh.
seemed, for him.
It was. I mean, I have to say, like, falling in love with him was like falling in love with a teenage boy. I mean, he had a very boyish quality in any case with anyone. He was so curious and sort of had this boyish curiosity along with this incredible brilliance. But, I had been in a 17-year-long relationship. My partner died unexpectedly and suddenly at age 43, and I'd had other relationships. And I'd been out since I was, I think, 24, 23. So I was much more used to that. And what was so charming and fun about our relationship, especially in the early years, is watching him discover what it's like to be in a domestic and romantic relationship. And he loved just the simplest things like making dinner together, um, opening a bottle of wine and cutting up some carrots and radishes. He loved radishes and putting out a tray of almonds. and setting the table and then making dinner together and cleaning up together. And I laughingly tell people, though this really is true, that I introduced Oliver Sacks to his kitchen appliances because he did live, as you said, a very monk-like existence, devoted to his work, to his writing, to his patients. And he had a wonderful housekeeper named Yolanda who came in 2 or 3 times a week, and she would, pre-make meals for him, healthy things that he would keep in the fridge, or he would just eat sardines, his favorite food, over the sink. And
That
he
was it.
never used the stove or oven. I mean, of course, he went out to restaurants with friends, but he never cooked. He never had loaded the dishwasher before. And he delighted in loading the dishwasher, so much so that even if even if it wasn't completely full, he would open up the cupboard and take out clean cups and mugs and plates and add them to the dishwasher because he thought they would like the company. They would like the company.
There's
He had a real
there's something impish about that, isn't there?
very impish, and he would laugh at himself about it too. But I would just sit there and just smile and laugh. I taught him how to use the microwave, and he did get to the point where he knew exactly how many seconds he wanted his mug of tea warmed up or rewarmed up. To to whatever it was, 14 seconds or 42 seconds. And he kind of delighted in it, and it was a really charming part of our relationship.
Well, I think there's a lot of evidence of Oliver Sacks's charm in general.
Yeah.
You mentioned, he went out to restaurants, and I also recently read Keith McNally's memoir, I Regret Everything.
Right. I did.
And yes, and so first of all, it's a great memoir. And the thing of it is contrary to this profile that we're building of Oliver Sacks, Keith McNally is a, self-proclaimed curmudgeon. Like, there's a lot of people that he talks about in that book very disparagingly, shall we say.
Yes.
But not Oliver. No, and so he
No.
paints this little portrait of Oliver, and he describes him as a great humanist and an astonishing writer and a kind and thoughtful man. And the thing that he said about Oliver that really stood out to me, because I started to see this thread through Oliver's work and your writing about him, is this idea that Oliver looked to see the good in people
Yeah.
and that he listened for it. And I just wondered, what was it like to be in conversation with him? That looking at you and listening as if he's curious about the good in you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to put it simply, it was great fun and fascinating. He had so many interests, and of course, he's known as a great neurologist and neuroscientist. But he had so many interests. He had a very deep knowledge of botany, and he had a special love of ferns. He was a proud member of the American Fern Society. Seriously, and he would go to meetings. I would sometimes go with him to drive him at the New York Botanical Garden to go to American Fern Society meetings, which the meetings were purely about like presenting new specimens of ferns and talking about them. And he would go on outings. I mean, one of his books, Oaxaca Journal, is about going on basically a fern hunting trip in Mexico with other fern lovers. He had a deep knowledge of the history of photography, of chemistry. I mean, his boyhood dream was to be a chemist, and he would literally read in bed chemistry texts and chemistry books. He had a complete set of the OED, Oxford English Dictionary, and he would sometimes bring to bed a volume of the OED just to read the words and the definitions.
Well, it
One,
was clear to
one, thing,
me, though.
one thing I really want people to understand is that Oliver was a genius. And that's not a word that he would have used to describe himself, but I recognize that. And I look back on it and think that genius itself is a kind of neurological aberration. And I don't mean anything negative in that use of the word aberration, just the rarity of a mind like his, with such deep knowledge, with a photographic memory. He could remember a line from Sir Thomas Browne and cite the page number in the book where it came from. But at the same time, he was incredibly unpretentious and modest and curious to learn what someone else thought about something. So when we talked, yes, he had many brilliant thoughts and ideas and concepts, but he also wanted to know what I thought. And he was like that, I'm sure, with his patients as well. He was a great listener.
Well, yes, I mean, we're saying all of this about Oliver, and I agree with you. From everything I have been able to read about him and by him, I suspect genius as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, and usually the giveaway to me is the ability to be cross-referential and, to have read as much literature as you have science.
Yeah.
I read literature. I don't read a lot of science other than psychology and the social sciences. So I couldn't read a chemistry book and
Yeah.
and take anything from that. So, but the thing is that he applied that genius to really serious neurological conditions, especially in his early years. He's studying Parkinson's and
Right.
Tourette's. I mean, these are profound problems that people have with their internal wiring, and yet he seemed to conclude that those conditions weren't a malady so much as they were evidence of the brain's broader function that we needed to understand, and that this struck me as less a pathologizing posture than it was, which would be common in his profession. Like, really, that's your job, to come in and tell somebody what's wrong with them. But he took this other path where he was trying to show us a different frame of what it means to be human. And what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think you've explained it exactly. I think you're exactly right. Um, yes, he saw, hundreds of patients with what were considered serious, and sometimes bizarre disorders and diseases. But he saw these as differences, not as disorders, and really encouraged his patients to see it that way and not to become that identity, someone with autism or Tourette's or even with Parkinson's, but to recognize your own individuality. And that was a reflection of Oliver himself, who could be nothing but his own authentic self. And this is a theme that runs throughout his writing and throughout his life. One of my very favorite lines that Oliver wrote was in his original essay for the New York Times in February 2015 called My Own Life, where he announced to the world in an essay that he had terminal cancer and 6 to 12 months left to live. And he wrote the most beautiful line. He said, it is the fate, the genetic and neural fate of every human being to be a unique individual. And that uniqueness he saw in every person and in himself. There was a volume of the letters of Oliver Sacks published last fall. Now, to most people, an 800-page volume of letters might not sound like compelling reading.
Yes, let's dive in.
It's such an incredible book. It's an autobiography in letters, and it shows the range of people that he wrote to. He spent time on correspondence every single day because he got hundreds of letters from people, colleagues, everyone from Nobel laureates to complete strangers. And one letter I want to quote, because he was so generous. I told you that we met through his writing me a letter.
Which is so charming.
He did not own a computer. He never sent an email or a text in his life. He was fortunate to have a very small staff who could email for him and, arrange things in that way. But there was no Wi-Fi in our apartment. There were only Bose radios in every room where he would play classical music. That was his idea of heaven, to turn every radio in every room, every Bose radio, to WQXR, the classical station here in New York, and have them playing at the same time. But in this collection of letters is a really poignant, beautiful letter that he wrote to a complete stranger, a woman who wrote to him, a young woman. And often people wrote to him asking for advice or a diagnosis. And she wrote to him and said that she had bipolar disorder. And she was very troubled by this. And she asked Dr. Sachs, why would evolution produce someone with bipolar disorder or any serious mental illness? And she said to him, am I just a mistake that somehow survived evolution's axe? And right away, Oliver wrote back to her, didn't know her. And he said to her, what seems to me less stressed and most in need of stressing is that you are an individual, unique, with gifts and genes which no one else in the world exactly duplicates. And that means you have a true place and role in evolution and in the present. That you have bipolar disorder does not begin to encompass the whole of you. It is a what, while you are you. You have to hold to the sense of personhood, which is deeper than any condition you have.
Wow.
So beautiful.
It's so beautiful. And it really echoes the sentiments of Carl Jung, who believed that people were more than what had happened to them. They were more, there was a holism there.
Right.
That we should be striving to understand about ourselves. And that letter is not only beautiful, but, it's true. It really is true, because I think, as the culture gets more and more therapized, we understand that we all have things, issues, neuroses, and the question is, there's a famous Jungian, James Hollis, who says, at middle age, we don't operate from our wounds so much as our defenses. And so trying to defend our lives against some of the things that are truly eating at us is perhaps not the way to look at life and look at ourselves. And I think that's what the point that he's making there. You're much more than your bipolar diagnosis.
Like saying to someone, I'm bipolar or I am autistic. I mean, one may have autism, but one may also be a brilliant engineer or a chemist, or which he found much more interesting to talk about. One of the things about neurology, I'm speaking very generally, and I'm not a neurologist, but there are conditions that are just very difficult to treat, or there's no real cure, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
What inspired Oliver was the way his patients adapted to their differences and the way they made their way through the world, despite having Tourette's, for example. He's kind of now known as, quote, the father of neurodiversity, which is not a term that he coined, but he certainly surfaced to the larger public these differences like autism and Tourette syndrome and others in a way that I think really shifted the way people looked at neurodivergence.
I think that's why men and women, people like Oliver, it's always worthwhile to look at their lives to see what also created this person and gave this person their point of view. And as I think about it, you're working with someone who maybe, let's say, has Tourette's. It's it's a problem that you can't hide from. It's overt.
Right.
And he took these on with such fascination. not so much like, I'm going to cure you. It's more like, let's figure this out.
And how fascinating.
Yes.
I, of course, had heard about Tourette's, had read about Tourette's, but I didn't meet someone with Tourette's until Oliver and I had lunch with a former patient who had become a friend. This was in Toronto, and this was someone with quite severe Tourette's and ticking and um, gesticulating and needing to tap things. And what was so incredible to me was, and we were in a restaurant where one might be embarrassed by the unusual behavior of such a person, but Oliver was completely unfazed. It was like, it was as if it was just like a bee, that was circling him, but he just let this young man be who he was, and never gave a thought to what other people in the restaurant might be thinking of what's going on at that table.
Well, this business of being unfazed, I want to pick up on that seed because, Carl Jung believed that the neurosis often stemmed from avoiding legitimate suffering rather than from the suffering itself. And so you wrote an essay that I read, which is what led me to you.
Mhm.
It appeared in the New York Times in 2024, and the title was "The Oliver Sacks I Knew and Loved Once Saw Himself as a Failure."
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it attracted my attention immediately because here was this award-winning neuroscientist who had written several books. Like, how could you see yourself as a failure? I was surprised not only by the title, but the outside world, I think, took him very seriously. And I think it was the New York Times who called him the poet laureate of medicine
Yeah.
because he was such a strong writer. Yet, you wrote in Insomniac City that at Beth Abraham Hospital and other places he worked, he never found his way. He had trouble making friends. He just didn't fit in, he felt. And that this was the source for, some feelings of failure. And that recurred in his somewhat nomadic life, meaning he didn't opt for uh, this cushy, tenure driven, secure position. He
No.
he he kind of moved around, and then so where what I'm getting at is that he had a rare insistence of following what fascinated him and what touched him. And out of this, he derived this sense, this spirit of everybody's uniqueness, including his own. And when I say that, I don't mean that as a precious, like, oh, everyone's unique.
Right.
It's really more profound than that.
Yeah, I think it came from deep within himself and just, feeling for lots of reasons, including being gay at a time when that was not acceptable to his family or to the culture, um, that he could just only be his authentic self. One of the real misunderstandings about Oliver, as I'm sure you know, is that he didn't really achieve fame until he was 52 years old. That's when The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat was published. He'd already published 3 books before that, including Awakenings, which people think people may assume was a huge bestseller, but it wasn't when it was published. It became a bestseller when it was turned into a movie many years later. But The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, which is a collection of neurological case histories and came out in, I think, 1985, um, very unexpectedly became a bestseller slowly. But then he was on the New York Times bestseller list for months and months and months, and he became the most famous neurologist in the world because of that book, because of the empathy with which he portrayed the patients he wrote about and the conditions he wrote about. And, the title was had something to do with it. It just sounds so intriguing. But
Yes.
almost overnight, within the space of 1 year, he became very famous and sought after to lecture, to teach. And it was the turning point in his life. But he was 52.
You know, you were in a relationship for 6 years with him, the last 6 years of his life.
Yeah.
And so that would be brief, by some measure, but considering it came at the end of a great life, it was monumental in many ways. You got to see a lot of growth, and you got to see him say goodbye to the world because he had cancer, so he had time to do that, and he wrote about it.
One question that I thought was really great was if there was a scene or exchange you two had in your life together that sums up who Oliver Sacks was, captures his essence, so to speak. Well, I think if I were just to pick one, like the first thing that came to my mind um, was when he received his terminal cancer diagnosis. I was with him in the doctor's office, and we did not suspect cancer. He wasn't feeling well. He had not been feeling well for a couple of weeks. This was after he had completed the manuscript for On the Move. And he thought he might have a gallbladder inflammation or infection. But they did some scans and found that he had metastatic liver cancer. And the doctor very gently told him, there are no real treatments or cures for this. And, he immediately wanted to know, what is the prognosis? And they said 6 to 12 months. And, Oliver was smart enough to know that this was not something that could be cured. And he'd had a melanoma about 9 years earlier that had metastasized to his liver, but no symptoms up until then. And what was so powerful, I was, in shock when the doctor said, you have metastatic liver cancer. I was standing behind him when he showed us the scans of his liver, which was just filled with tumors. What was so powerful was his clarity about how he wanted to go forward. Um, we asked, is there any treatment that would be possible? And they said, well, there are experimental treatments we're trying, and in fact, we already have called up a team of oncologists. But he said, too many of my patients, both of my older brothers, suffered through chemotherapy and experimental treatments that just ruined the last months of their life. And I don't want to go out that way. I want to work. I want to write. I want to be with Billy. I want to see friends. I want to travel if I can. I want to be able to swim. And that is indeed how he lived out the last 8 months of his life. He died in August of that year. He got the diagnosis in January. And it was truly, I've told people in that 8 months, there was more laughter than tears. We had a great time. He was so prolific. He wrote major pieces, not only the essays in the New York Times, but a long piece for the New Yorker, a case history, a great piece for the New York Review of Books, short, humorous talk of the town pieces, and letters. As I said, he wrote letters every day. But what so struck me I was just shell shocked. It was just the clarity. And when we got into the car to go home after this shocking diagnosis, the first thing he did was to call his publisher and say, I want my autobiography, my memoir, On the Move, to be published. They had planned to publish it the next fall. And he said, I'm not going to be here. And I want to see this book published. I want to be completely open to the world about who I am. Again, he had already finished it and writing about being gay and about us and everything. And the publisher, bless them, moved mountains to get it published before he died. And It came out in April 2015. We had a book party. It was a blast. And the book became a bestseller and it was very well reviewed. And he was so grateful. And I think it was such a weight off his shoulders just to finally be open and, as he would say, to complete his life. And so that's the moment I really remember. I was just his clarity. There were no tears. It was just, what are the facts? And this is how I want to move forward. This is how I want to live my life.
As you look back, what are some of the things that you learned about life from Oliver?
To remain curious, to work. Work was important to him. To write. I was picked up Insomniac City, my memoir, this morning to look at it, and I was reminded of something he said to me out of the blue exactly 2 weeks before he died. Just out of the blue. He said, "The most we can do is to write intelligently, creatively, critically, evocatively about what it is like living in the world at this time."
Mm.
And he did that up until the very end.
As we wrap up, Bill, what are you working on right now? Do you have anything? You're prolific as well.
Well, I've written a screenplay for a film adaptation of Insomniac City, my memoir, and it's in the works.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
It's been a long journey, as movie and TV projects are, I'm told, but it's the first time I'd ever written a screenplay. And but when the producers optioned the book, they said, "We want you to write the screenplay." And I said, I've never written a screenplay. And they said, "We know you can do it, and we'll help you. We'll help you. We have a kind of method for developing screenplays." Anyway, long story short, it's in development. We have a director, and it's financed, and we'll probably begin shooting next year. And then I'm working on my own essays. Something I'm working on right now is an essay about Oliver's surprising, enthusiastic habit of annotating his books. When he died, I inherited his personal library of 10,000 books and all of those possessions. And it was such a daunting task to try to sort the books and figure out what to do with them. I couldn't keep them all myself.
I wish I had been your neighbor. That sounds like a very fancy problem. 10,000 books.
Yeah.
I'm like jealous,
10,000 books.
Wow.
Custom-made floor-to-ceiling bookcases throughout the apartment. So I just started, at the top shelf on the left, began going through the books and dividing them into different categories. And what I discovered, to my surprise, really, I did not know, is that he heavily annotated or wrote in or commented on the pages of books he was reading, going back to his school days. And he is sometimes in conversation, literally, with Kant and Kierkegaard and Jung and Hannah Arendt and Darwin, and writing in the margins, agreeing, disagreeing, coming up with his own sort of inspirations. Freud, sometimes agreeing, sometimes disagreeing, sometimes being inspired by a new idea. They're really beautiful. And he, funnily enough, would write in all different colors of felt pens, even on the same page, turning a book upside down to complete a thought. And I found about 500 of these in this library of 10,000 books. So I'm working on an essay about Oliver's jottings, as he called them.
Beautiful. I'll look forward to that and to see the film come out. I want to thank you, Bill. It's been great having you on the show, and I wish you all the best in your endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about training programs, live and self-study courses, archives, this podcast, our blog, or to find Jungian analysts near you, visit our website, jungchicago.org. Thank you to our 2025 donors who gave at the sporting level and above. Arlo Kampeng, Usha and Ashok Baby, David Dalrymple in honor of Tom Kapasinskas, Peter Demuth, Mary Doherty, Carl Greer, Ken James, David Johnson, Mary Ann Johnson, John Manning in honor of Janine Mellinger, Mona Manning, Boris Matthews, Kenan McKee, Karen Newland, Murray Stein in honor of Lee Roloff, Mary Tice, Florence Tingley, Alexander Wayne, Ellen Young, and the Kapagangula Ramji Charitable Fund. You can support this podcast by making a donation at our website, jungchicago.org.